surviving. Among the many fallen, the most iconic were by far the non-avian dinosaurs, who up until that point had ruled the lands for roughly 165 million years. The suddenness of the dinosaurs' extinction, coupled with how fast it happened, has led many to refer to the day of impact as the day the dinosaurs died, and there are even documentaries with such names. But did the dinosaurs really die? All at once on the same day after all, dinosaurs could be found on every continent during the late Cretaceous, and were fairly diverse. Researchers estimate that there were over 1,000 species roaming around when the asteroid touched down. Many of these dinosaurs were armored, others giant, and some were even below the weight threshold for survival. So it seems a bit hard to believe that they just vanished in an instant. And for the most part, paleontologists do think that the demise of non-avian dinosaurs was not instantaneous. Technically, we still had dinosaurs during the Cretaceous. However, studies still support the idea that the majority of dinosaurs did, in fact, perish within the first 24 hours due to the widespread effects of the asteroid. Extreme heat, forest fires, blast waves, earthquakes, and tsunamis were all real threats, especially for those in the Western Hemisphere, with many as far away as 2,500 miles, 2,400 kilometers, dying within minutes. Some were shielded from these immediate effects, but what even they couldn't escape was the massive amounts of superhot material thrown into the atmosphere. Possibly as much as 25 trillion tons of material was ejected. This material was for a time several times hotter than the surface of the sun. So when a good chunk of it came raining back down, it heated up the atmosphere to oven-like temperatures, cooking anything out in the open from the inside out, and starting fires in about 70% of all forests on Earth. This alone left only a few animals standing, but in certain areas that were more protected, like marshes, dense humid forests, and high latitudes, pockets of dinosaurs would have remained standing. However, it's worth mentioning that these survivors were likely not the big guys, but rather small species, or possibly juveniles. Things, however, were not over for them yet, because all the fires and ejecta both led to untold amounts of dust, soot, and other particles coating the skies, blocking out the sun, leading to sharp decreases in global temperature, where the average may have dropped as much as 36 degrees, 20 degrees. On top of this, the blocking of the sun led to perpetual darkness, which brought its own unpleasant issues. It's thought that this apocalyptic winter was the final nail in the coffin for the non-avian dinosaurs. But this is also where things get a bit gray, because no one really knows how long it took for this period to kill the survivors. Or if some even survived this fallout yet, were impacted enough that they couldn't ever recover. A good chunk of research believes that at the very least, survivors hung on for a few weeks, months, or possibly years, with carnivores likely sticking around the longest since. At the start, there would have been a plethora of carcasses to choose from. Herbivores, on the other hand, were pretty much doomed from the get-go, with most of their food having been burned in the forest fires. Some of the luckier ones may have stumbled upon preserved pockets of vegetation, but that didn't last long either. And then, once the herbivores dropped, the carnivores soon followed. One of the most recent studies put an exact expiration date on dinosaurs at 15 years after D-Day. The study suggested that all the dust and other material in the air would have sustained a 15-year nightmare where temperatures were low and photosynthesis was almost entirely blocked, being completely halted for at least 1 year. During this time frame, it's thought that the non-avian dinosaurs, who were already few and far between, slowly dropped like flies, either freezing or starving to death. There are multiple other studies that paint similar time spans, typically all falling within 100 years. However, some researchers have pushed back on these shorter timelines, preferring the idea that the extinction of dinosaurs didn't happen quickly, but rather stretched out over thousands of years. Small populations likely survived well into the early Paleocene, suggesting that entire generations of dinosaurs continued to persist. These longer estimates typically fall within a few thousand years, but some studies propose even longer timelines, with one 2013 study suggesting that it took 33,000 years for the collision event to wipe out every single non-avian dinosaur. The hypothesis here is that a few unknown dinosaur species likely endured the worst of the asteroid impact, and even saw the world stabilize in some ways during this time. During this period, mammals likely increased in size, insects had a population boost, and large turtles and crocodilians may have become the largest animals around, creating a strange world compared to what dinosaurs were used to. Paleontologists believe that these changes ultimately led to the extinction of dinosaurs, as mammals and non-dinosaur reptiles gradually outcompeted the remaining dinosaurs. While the final outcome was that the dinosaurs went extinct, it would have been impressive if they had survived for another 33,000 years, which would have amounted to over 1,000 generations of dinosaurs. Surprisingly, some researchers have an even more optimistic hypothesis, suggesting that some dinosaurs could have survived for an extreme amount of time, possibly up to 1 million years. The strongest case for such a long survival time comes from an area not so far from the epicenter in Colorado and New Mexico. Specifically, a team of paleontologists discovered the remains of hadrosaurs, tyrannosaurs, ankylosaurs, and even sods within a remote part of the San Juan Basin that were dated to the Paleocene epoch, about 500,000 years after the initial impact. Of course, this raised a lot of questions not only about how they survived so long, but also why, of all places, did they only seem to survive in the southern US, which is relatively close to the crater. According to the lead paleontologist, there are three possible explanations. The first is that the area they were in was heavily sheltered from the blast, perhaps akin to a canyon that offered ample protection from the worst effects. The second, more likely scenario, is that the diverse group of survivors wasn't originally from the US, but rather from up north, like Alberta, Canada, where the asteroid's effects were comparatively less severe. Then, after the drop in temperature and decrease in resources, they were eventually forced to venture south, where they likely stumbled upon a small area that could still sustain life. The final idea proposed was that no juvenile or mature individual survived the extinction because they were simply too large. Instead, their eggs, protected by nests and small in size, escaped obliteration and then hatched once the most immediate effects had passed. With a lot of luck, they were able to re-establish themselves for 500,000 years. If accurate, this means that these dinosaurs witnessed Earth fully recover from the asteroid's effects in most ways, and they may have even encountered new animals that emerged from that time, including freshwater eels, Diaspoliopam, Morphia mesia, and Pantodon, to name a few. Of course, to no surprise, these findings have been met with a lot of criticism from the paleontology community. The biggest pushback is that these dinosaurs were not from the Paleocene and that their fossils had simply eroded at some point and were redeposited into younger grounds, giving the illusion that they hadn't died with the rest of their kind. The researchers who made the original find have since come forward and defended their claims, saying that the bones could not have been moved around, as many of them remained together, with the most prominent example coming from a single dinosaur with 34 of its bones arranged in perfect order. Nevertheless, this controversial discovery is mainly considered invalid today, though there are still those who believe in it. Hold on to the idea that dinosaurs stuck around much longer than we usually give them credit for, including the larger ones like giant thods. While this is very speculative, it has led to some interesting questions about how larger creatures would have survived in a post-asteroid world. Would they have been restricted to just hunting other survivors, unable to capture more agile mammals? Or did they experience changes themselves, perhaps rapidly decreasing in size due to limited resources, a phenomenon seen in animals that experience dwarfism on smaller islands? Ultimately, no one is certain how long our favorite extinct animals lasted, but it's nice to think that they stuck around for a bit longer. For now, the youngest dinosaur accepted by science remains a Triceratops specimen, believed to have died around the time of the impact, perhaps even succumbing like most others to the blast itself. The conversation around dinosaur survival has also led many to wonder if other prehistoric creatures persisted after the event. What about other creatures like pterosaurs or mosasaurs? Currently, no one has a clear answer, but there is a more obscure group of animals from that time, the ammonoids, which are thought to have possibly lived about 1 million years after the Cretaceous. Like the San Juan Basin claim, this idea is quite controversial, but it has garnered more support overall. We can only hope that more discoveries in the future will provide more clarity on the fates of the dinosaurs as well. Imagine a world 66 million years ago. Picture a massive beast roaming the plains of southwestern North America, blissfully unaware that its days were numbered. This colossal creature wasn't just another dinosaur. It was the final representative of its kind, the last of its species to ever walk across North America. But the legacy of this giant doesn't end there. In fact, it still holds a record today as the largest known terrestrial animal to have ever inhabited North America. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the Allosaurus. Despite its immense size and power, this dinosaur's story is one that's as fascinating as it is tragic. Despite its incredible achievements, Allosaurus has remained relatively under the radar compared to other late Cretaceous North American dinosaurs. It's also not as famous as other mainstream giants like Brachiosaurus or Argentinosaurus. This is quite puzzling, especially when you consider that, in addition to its massive size, Allosaurus caught the attention of paleontologists quite early on. Its existence was first recognized in 1921 when a shoulder and pelvic bone were discovered in the deserts of New Mexico. From the moment the bones were found, Charles Gilmore, the paleontologist who discovered them, realized that this was a brand new type of sauropod. However, since the bones only represented a small portion of the full body, there weren't many details that could be revealed immediately about this new dinosaur. Nonetheless, Gilmore described Allosaurus just 1 year after its discovery, naming it Allosaurus sanguinus, in honor of the Alamo Formation where the fossils were found. Ironically, the name Allosaurus became its first claim to fame, but for the wrong reasons. Many people mistakenly believed that the Alamo in its name was linked to the famous Alamo in Texas, causing quite a bit of confusion. However, in reality, Alamo Formation, where this dinosaur was discovered, has no relation to the Alamo in Texas. Allosaurus failed to generate any meaningful buzz during the early and mid-1900s, since the little bones that were known only indicated it to be a mid-sized sauropod and nothing more. However, everything changed in the 2000s when multiple discoveries revealed that Allosaurus had been an unknown giant all along. These discoveries specifically consisted of a giant fragmented leg bone, a separate yet equally large cervical, and a juvenile specimen, which turned out to be the most complete fossil of any known Allosaurus to date. The completeness of the young Allosaurus allowed paleontologists to determine that the giant isolated fossils did indeed belong to Allosaurus, and showed that this creature got much bigger than originally thought. In fact, these new finds pretty much thrust Allosaurus straight to the top of the list of North America's largest dinosaurs. Estimates suggest that, on average, these titans could reach about 26 meters, 85 feet, long from head to tail, while standing 5 meters, 16 feet, tall at the shoulders and weighing about 39 tons. Even at this size, Allosaurus is one of Earth's largest sauropods. But, like many other long-necked dinosaurs, certain individuals could get much bigger than the rest. The largest Allosaurus probably came in at around 30 meters, 98 feet, and weighed 88 tons, making it more than 8 times the weight of a fully grown T-Rex, the largest North American terrestrial predator of all time. When compared to other sauropods, Allosaurus completely blows all other North American sauropods out of the water, including the famous bunch that lived together during the Jurassic period, which included Apatosaurus and Brachiosaurus. On top of this, large Allosaurus specimens likely rivaled even the largest sauropods seen on other continents too, with paleontologists generally considering it to have been similar in size to behemoths like the South American Argentinosaurus and the Asian Ruyangosaurus, the former of which is often considered to be the top contender for the largest dinosaur ever. Coming from the late Cretaceous, it may not come as a shock that Allosaurus was a member of the Titanosaur clade. These dinosaurs dominated the entire span of the Cretaceous, being the largest and most widespread sauropods around, existing on all 7 continents. Within this group, Allosaurus is generally placed in the Saltasauridae family, a family of dinosaurs characterized by having 35 or fewer caudal vertebrae. Another feature that made Saltasaurs stand out was not only their occasional massive bodies, but also their protective armor. This adaptation helped them defend themselves from various threats, playing a vital role in their survival during the Cretaceous period. This part may come as a bit of a surprise, since most people don't think of sauropods as being armored. However, Allosaurus and the rest of its family did indeed possess a fair degree of armor, which came in the form of bony scutes. It's not well known how much of its body was covered by this armor, but recent finds suggest that, at the very least, part of its back was covered by these bony plates. What's more, these scutes may have been a bit pointy, as certain paleontologists have found remains that appear to take a more spiky shape rather than a round one. This means that this titan could have been walking around with giant spikes along its back and possibly other parts of its body too. These scutes are thought to have played a role in protection against attacks from predatory theropods, or they could have been used as a form of social identification and display. Whatever the case, these spikes were no doubt useful, yet they still weren't Allosaurus's top defense. That was its skeletal structure. Compared to most sauropods, Allosaurus had an extremely robust body, with both its neck and chest being especially sturdy. This gave Allosaurus a big boost in durability and kept its most vulnerable organs well out of harm's way. Matured large adults were practically untouchable by any carnivorous dinosaurs. However, juveniles and smaller adults, on the other hand, were not 100% safe, as they did live alongside Tyrannosaurus, and Allosaurus actually coexisted with both species of the tyrant lizard, T-Rex, and the older Albertosaurus. Both of these species were giant, and were actually known to have attacked and scavenged Allosaurus, as certain specimens bear healed bite marks, indicating active predation, while other fossils show unhealed bites, meaning that the individual was already dead or died during the attack. However, the predation of Allosaurus was ultimately uncommon, as the vast majority of specimens show no bite marks at all, showing just how valuable size was. If you lived alongside the king, sometimes size and bony armor were the ultimate protection, but not always. Scutes weren't enough, and that's why some paleontologists assert that Allosaurus likely had an active defensive weapon too. Its tail, like many titanosaurs, was quite long and whip-like, although not as long as the tail seen in Diatocids. Nevertheless, many believe that Allosaurus potentially wielded its built-in whip as a weapon. This theory gains more credibility when you consider that titanosaurs have the highest rates of tail damage among any sauropod group, even outclassing the diatichids, indicating that their tails were quite active, so to speak. The injuries in question often consisted of force-based trauma, raising the possibility that the tail was indeed used as a weapon. Overall, Allosaurus no doubt had an imposing appearance, which has helped increase the amount of attention it has received. Another detail that has added to the resurgence in interest, which has nothing to do with its size or physical appearance, is when it lived. Allosaurus lived during the late Cretaceous, specifically between 70 and 66 million years ago, a monumental time to be alive. This period is now referred to as the sauropod hiatus, a time when sauropods suddenly vanished from North America. This absence lasted for over 30 million years until Allosaurus showed up. This pivotal gap in sauropod history has generated a lot of debate over the years, both about why they seemingly vanished and how Allosaurus appeared millions of years later. The most common explanation is that their disappearance was the result of an extinction event, with paleontologists citing competition with ornithischians, such as Hypsilophodon, and the expansion of the western interior seaway as potential causes. As for the appearance of Allosaurus, the common thought is that it managed to repopulate southern North America after migrating there from South America, or possibly even from Asia, though this idea is less accepted. Of course, by the time it entered the continent 70 million years ago, Allosaurus still had to contend with plenty of competition and a rather large western interior seaway, yet it managed to thrive despite seemingly not being too different from its distant ancestors. There was no significant change in its diet, as it still possessed rod-shaped teeth that were used to crop and strip vegetation from medium to tall trees, just like its predecessors. Additionally, the discovery of stones within multiple specimens' stomachs confirmed that Allosaurus routinely consumed rocks to aid digestion, a common trend seen among other sauropods as well. Nevertheless, its arrival resulted in Allosaurus being an extreme success, and it even became one of the most common late Cretaceous dinosaurs in North America, with an especially high prevalence within what is today the U.S. Its apparent high population was so staggering compared to other dinosaurs that paleontologists actually use the term Allosaurus fauna to describe the general life found within certain areas. Along with strong numbers, Allosaurus was also able to re-establish a respectable domain for sauropods, with fossils being found throughout a large portion of the southern United States and northern Mexico. In these lands, populations would have lived in both coastal habitats bordering the western interior seaway, as well as inhabiting semi-arid inland plains, where relief from the dry climate was found in the form of rivers, swamps, and lakes. Allosaurus lived alongside a large variety of different dinosaurs, including species like Ohocatops, Glyptodon, Topella richardoia, Ohoraposa, Dinobellor, Torosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, Bravocatops, Gryposaurus, Catosaurus, Cesus, undetermined Ankylosaurus, and many others. Non-dinosaur life was also very abundant in these areas, represented by numerous fish, rays, amphibians, turtles, snakes, lizards, crocodilians, mammals, and pterosaurs. Plesiosaurus, in particular, was quite abundant, with species like Well and Hopus and Quellcatlas being the most widespread. Interestingly, Quellcatlas was so common in areas where Allosaurus fossils have been found that some paleontologists have wondered if there might be a connection between the two, much like the relationship between certain birds and elephants, or between fish and whale sharks. In any case, Allosaurus and Quellcatlas would have been a common yet breathtaking sight, as both were giants in their own rights. Ultimately, Allosaurus was the true titan of these lands, a distinction it held until the very bitter end. An end that perhaps should have come later than it did, as like many others, it too was still kicking 66 million years ago when the KT extinction event occurred. But what's interesting about Allosaurus is that bones belonging to a juvenile were found only a few feet below the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, making it one of the youngest known dinosaurs and presumably one of the last non-avian dinosaurs around. Perhaps not a surprising feat for North America's largest and last titan, but, as mentioned, Allosaurus was not the only North American dinosaur to make it to the end of the Cretaceous period. In fact, there's another dinosaur whose fossils have only been found a few inches below the KT boundary, making it one of the youngest dinosaurs known to science. It's also the only dinosaur known to have injured the T-Rex. So, if that sounds interesting, check out the video I just made on that recently. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment on what you thought after watching. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Imagine a time 100 million years ago. The late Cretaceous had just begun, and in northern Africa, the largest African predator of all time, the second biggest theropod ever known, was roaming the land. Spinosaurus. It was just starting its reign, a dynasty that would span millions of years. With its immense size and its iconic enormous sail, Spinosaurus was destined to leave a lasting legacy, making it one of the most famous dinosaurs to ever exist. In fact, it's likely the third most famous theropod, after Tyrannosaurus rex and the Velociraptor. But despite its fame and towering stature, very few people know that Spinosaurus actually had a twin, so to speak. While it was ruling the land in Africa, a nearly identical Spinosaurus, equal in power and appearance, was dominating its own territory in South America. This was the Oxala, and unlike its African sibling, Spinosaurus has been known to science for over 100 years. But the Oxala is a much newer discovery in paleontology, having been described in 2011. The first fossil attributed to this remarkable dinosaur was discovered in the Alcantara Formation of northern Brazil, consisting of the frontmost snout bones. Paleontologists were quick to recognize that this newly discovered dinosaur was a member of the Spinosaurus family, as its snout shared many characteristics found only in other Spinosaurus species. This clear classification led to a quick description and naming, with the founders dubbing it Oxala cuumbensis, a tribute to the African deity Obatala. The discovery of such a dinosaur in Brazil made waves, but it wasn't as monumental as it might sound, as Spinosaurids in Brazil were already known to science. These discoveries had been made as early as the late 90s, with fossils like Irritator preceding the Oxala find. Although Oxala arrived a bit late to the party, it still blew many away, not because of any crazy feature, but because of its size. Both the snout and a later found skull fragment came from individuals that seemingly dwarfed other known Spinosaurids, excluding Spinosaurus, while also outclassing nearly every other theropod known to science. Recent studies estimate that adults were between 12 and 14 meters, 39 and 46 feet in length, weighing anywhere from 5 to 7 tons, which, if accurate, would easily make it Brazil's largest predator ever and one of the top 10 heaviest known theropods. With such massive size, mature Oxala would have been virtually untouchable by other carnivores. Because of its large size and overwhelming power, Oxala is thought to have been the apex predator in its ecosystem, much like how Spinosaurus reigned supreme in its environment. With its hunting prowess and superior strength, it dominated the food chain in South America during that time. The shared role between Spinosaurus and Oxala, and the fact that both were closely matched in size, has long intrigued paleontologists. This curiosity is only heightened by the fact that they both lived at the exact same time, leading some to consider Oxala not a new dinosaur, but rather a new species of Spinosaurus that might have reached South America via Africa, as at the time, the two continents were much closer together than they are today. Another argument is that Oxala, or perhaps its direct ancestor, may have been in South America the whole time. Around 140 million years ago, it was physically connected to Africa, and so a population of Spinosaurus may have been split as the two landmasses drifted apart, eventually giving rise to Oxala in Brazil. In addition to all these possibilities, there's yet another argument that Oxala isn't even a new species of Spinosaurus, but simply a younger adult of the already described Spinosaurus aegyptiacus that hadn't finished growing. For now, Oxala is still officially considered a valid genus, with the strongest evidence of its uniqueness being the differences seen in its skull. Specifically, Oxala had more tightly packed teeth, a relatively thicker jaw, and a straighter snout compared to Spinosaurus. Nevertheless, the similarities were still uncanny, and it's widely believed that the two were very close relatives, with paleontologists considering Oxala to have been more closely related to Spinosaurus than to other Brazilian spinosaurids. Typically, the questions surrounding its relation to Spinosaurus would be further solved by analyzing its entire skeleton, although this is a bit tricky to do with Oxala, as its bones no longer exist. Tragically, after its discovery, all uncollected material was stored in what was Latin America's largest natural history museum, which caught fire in 2018, leading to the loss of 92.5% of its entire catalog, including all Oxala bones. Since then, no more fossils of it have been unearthed. To fully answer the question regarding its relation to Spinosaurus, the destruction of the bones also means that we don't know much about its general appearance, and paleontologists aren't even 100% certain if it had a sail or just a ridge. However, due to its proposed close relationship to Spinosaurus, most reconstructions and studies assume that it did possess a sail, which it could have used in a number of ways, including heat regulation, display, and intimidation, making individuals appear larger than they really were. Beyond the sail, paleontologists are thankfully able to tell with better confidence what this prehistoric nightmare was like. Across all Spinosaurids, some features were universal, including extremely robust and powerfully built limbs. Like its relatives, Oxala would have had giant, muscular limbs. Oxala had a set of stocky arms, each equipped with relatively large claws, with the first digit possessing a disproportionately long claw, giving it the appearance of having hooks for hands. Along with these deadly hooks, the holotype showed that Oxala also had an enormous skull that somewhat resembled that of a modern crocodilian, reaching up to 1.35 meters, 4.4 feet, long, making it bigger than the skull of Acrocanthosaurus. Inside this giant skull, its mouth was lined with over 40 sharp, conical, oval-shaped teeth, a feature that added to its terrifying appearance. Oxala certainly paints a rather menacing picture, but in reality, these characteristics were more good news than bad news for the dinosaurs living alongside it. These traits seemingly made Oxala better designed for fishing rather than killing dinosaurs. Specifically, paleontologists believe it used its large claws to slice and hook slippery, large fish, while its teeth further prevented escape thanks to their conical nature. Additionally, the teeth were arranged in a rosette pattern, which essentially made them interlock when clamping down, essentially creating a fish trap. This tooth pattern is also seen in living animals today, including the Indian gavial, currently the world's largest crocodilian, adding more fuel to the idea that Oxala was indeed a master fisherman. Its environment also suggests a seafood lifestyle, as many large fish, similar and sometimes identical to those seen in Spinosaurus habitats, lived alongside Oxala as well. These include species like Atlantoceros, Anchopristmaya, and Stephanodus. Don't get confused, though. Despite its seemingly simple fish diet, Oxala was no dinosaur to be trifled with, and it had no trouble holding its own against terrestrial predators thanks to its size and deadly claws. Its bite may also have been a decent deterrent, with studies indicating a bite force roughly 20 times that of a wolf. On top of this, Oxala had 2 replacement teeth in each socket, allowing it to switch out damaged teeth and ensuring peak sharpness, while also suggesting it could have been used to attack animals with tough protections. Not only was it no pushover, but Oxala likely wasn't a strict piscivore either, with the common thought being that it was an opportunistic carnivore that would prey on small to medium-sized dinosaurs and non-aquatic animals from time to time. This is primarily based on findings seen in its relatives, as Irritator is known to prey on parasaurs, while a bionic specimen was found with both fish remains and the body of an iguana in its stomach. Adult Oxala most likely spent the better part of the day near sources of water, where they could prowl for fish, while also being on the lookout for any terrestrial animals nearby that they could ambush. Confusion arises once again, as if you know anything about Spinosaurids, particularly Spinosaurus. You'll know that no one really agrees on how well these creatures were adapted to water. This leads some to think that Oxala was an adept swimmer capable of deep diving for food, while others are more conservative, believing that it wouldn't have been a graceful swimmer, instead clumsily swimming on the surface and preferring to stick to the coasts, waiting in shallow water. However, recent studies tend to back the waiting hypothesis more, although this is still heavily debated. Whatever the case, we know that Oxala did, to some degree, get wet, as unlike other theropods, its nostrils were positioned much higher up along its snout, a design meant to help keep water out of the nostrils when its head was partially submerged. So, while clearly having some adaptations for a watery life, scientists believe that Oxala was still surprisingly adept on land, even though it had relatively short legs and was probably fast enough to catch a variety of lumbering animals, especially if it was employing ambush tactics, which seems very likely given its environment. Studies on the formation where it was found suggest that during the late Cretaceous, Oxala lived in a habitat not far from the coast that had a mix of fresh and brackish water. The land itself was dominated by humid tropical forests, where conifers, ferns, and horsetails formed thick canopies, providing ample hiding places for animals. Beyond these forests, the earth gave way to open areas that were much more brutal and dry, holding an arid or semi-arid climate, with periods of lengthy droughts being common. Animals typically tried to avoid these areas, but in the forest and along the coastline, life was extremely abundant, leading Oxala to live alongside many other dinosaurs, including Limosaurus. Oxala lived alongside many other dinosaurs, including Malawisaurus, a Carcharodontosaur, 2 Titanosaurs, an Abelisaur, and a Dromaeosaur. It also shared its habitat with other Spinosaurus species, one of which remains undetermined, while the other was Sigilmassasaurus, a dinosaur that was nearly the same size as Oxala and the second largest predator around. However, Sigilmassasaurus is even more controversial than its Spinosaurus twin, with many people thinking it might not be a new genus, but rather a synonym for another Spinosaurus species. In addition to dinosaurs and the previously mentioned fish, non-dinosaurs were abundant as well, represented by animals such as pterosaurs, kingas, sucus, turtles, and snakes. Much of the life found in these ancient lands was similar to what was seen in the Kemkem Formation of northern Africa, where Spinosaurus mostly reigned supreme. The similarities between the two formations are again thought to be a result of the connection that Brazil and Africa shared 140 million years ago. This shared life ultimately proved beneficial for Oxala, as it provided a perfect ecosystem for its skill set and hunting abilities. Fossil records show that Oxala thrived there for millions of years, from 100.5 million years ago to 93.9 million years ago, when it suddenly vanished from the fossil record. Its extinction is pretty interesting, considering it died out around the exact same time as Spinosaurus, which also marked the end of the Spinosaurids, as far as we know. No one is certain about what took these two out, but one idea that is usually brought forward is that rising sea levels may have destroyed their preferred habitats, triggering a slow decline, and leading Oxala to compete with other terrestrial hunters that were better adapted for hunting big game. On the flip side, another proposed hypothesis is that a long-standing drought killed off its prey and depleted freshwater sources, thus again leading to its final demise. While it may be gone for good, Oxala is still undeniably one of the most menacing theropods out there, and it's a shame it hasn't gotten as much attention on the big screen as its twin. But Spinosaurus isn't the only one who had a lesser-known relative. T-Rex actually had an older brother, so to speak, and I actually made a video on that recently. So, if you found this one interesting, go check that out. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications so you won't miss any future exciting videos, and leave a comment to let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Imagine for a moment that a mad scientist forces you into a time machine and demands you pick a random period to travel to. Now, you might think the Jurassic period is a safe bet, right? Think again. If you pick 150 million years ago, you're in for a world of trouble. This wasn't just another chapter in dinosaur history. It was a time when danger lurked around every corner, and death was more instant than you'd ever want to imagine. Sure, dinosaurs dominated the land, but the ones roaming around back then weren't your average creatures. They were absolute giants, and many paleontologists consider this period the golden age of massive, meat-hungry predators. But even if you could snap your fingers and make the dinosaurs disappear, 150 million years ago would still be the last place you want to be, with oceans, skies, and land teeming with life forms that were absolutely unforgiving to anything that didn't belong. Welcome to the late Jurassic. Imagine standing on Earth 150 million years ago, and not even a map could help you. The continents looked so different that you wouldn't recognize them at all. North America was the closest to what we know today, though it still had a few changes, but that's where the familiar ends. South of there was a massive landmass, the last supercontinent, Gondwana. This giant landmass consisted of South America, the Arabian Peninsula,